Question is the motion be agreed to. The honourable member for Nelson in reply.
I don't think Hansard indicates steam coming out of one's ears, Mr President, in this place.
We could describe it though. No,
perhaps I can just note for the record.
that steam's coming out of your ears.
Steam. Unbelievable. But first, Mr President, let me thank members for contributions on the motion. I appreciate the member for Murchison's comprehensive contribution and her reiteration that we should expect a formal response to this very reasonable request, and that contribution from the government certainly doesn't constitute that, actually. If this motion passes this place today, it's a formal communication from this chamber to the government, and it requires a response accordingly.
It's a respectful thing to do.
It is the respectful thing to do, and if the government expects this place to do its business, it should also respectfully engage with the business of this place that goes through on private members' days, including motions that call on for a response.
Hear, hear.
So I appreciate the contribution from the member for Murchison and her reiteration of the principles underpinning this motion, and its importance and its clarity and its fairly much straightforward simplicity, really. It's not controversial, it's not particularly onerous, it's reasonable, and it's actually just standard good practice. Thank you to the member for Hobart for the contribution on the motion. I appreciated your highlighting of the fact that public interest should sit at the heart of everything we do and everything our government does in its role on behalf of the Tasmanian community, and we need transparency in order to demonstrate public interest being pursued and delivered. I agree with the various examples you provided, Member for Hobart, of the challenges that we face in Tasmania in relation to inappropriate influence into our political space and our decision making, particularly from vested interests who we see blatant examples of policy capture, of regulatory capture, and it is absolutely imperative that we build a scaffolding of transparency and integrity measures to try to work against and mitigate against the risks involved in eroding our democracy through the sort of influence that can be brought to bear when you are opaque, when you are doing the business of government behind closed doors and without proper public visibility and the opportunity for scrutiny and oversight from this place and from the community itself. I appreciate the member for Hobart pointing to the RTI report, and I find it very interesting, the government's contribution in relation to that report coming out today. I'll have a bit more to say about that in a minute. It is an interesting report that's come out today, and I've had a bit of a read of just the executive summary thus far, and I think the pieces that you, Member for Hobart, read out in her contribution were highly relevant to here. That report absolutely concurs with the intent of this motion and the importance of changing culture around matters of transparency and integrity and accountability. And the government is doing nothing to demonstrate that it is changing culture on those fronts, including in its response to that RTI report today thus far. Which brings me to the government's contribution, Mr President. Yet again, the government defaults to listing things it's doing, which is completely irrelevant to the core of this motion and its responsibilities in responding to this motion. Pointing to quarterly reporting of ministerial diaries that only occurred the first time this motion was brought to this place in 2023, and it was brought in as a bit of integrity washing, Mr President. It's as simple as that. You're being asked to do something, you know this chamber was going to call on the government to do it, and so instead of genuinely engaging with that motion the first time and doing a consultation and coming up with a model that was through a warranted and appropriate process, It jumped in to do a voluntary model. And rather than pat itself on the back about that, Mr President, the government should be ashamed, I think, of this integrity washing that it tried to do. Because to voluntarily put in place a model that you know to be absolutely dysfunctional in delivering the intent of actually having such a model is absolutely pernicious in further eroding public trust in government. To say that we've discussed regularly this model is absolutely ridiculous from the government, as if that's a positive. The only times we've discussed it is when I brought these motions to this place to point out the insufficiencies of the voluntary, untimely, pretty much useless model the government put in place as its piece of integrity washing. The only times we've discussed it as that, and every time the government has voted against or said they're against the motion and refused to improve their utterly useless current voluntary model. To say, and here's Mr President, and this is where we have crossover with the RTI report that came out today, to say here in this place, in its contribution, the government to say that if people need more detail than the various matters or various issues listed as a purpose in the current disclosure model, they can then go ahead and RTI it or maybe give the Premier a call, is the worst kind of nonsense. It's offensive for the government to say such a thing. What the RTI report makes very clear, done by Professor Rick Snell and Professor Tim McCormack, is it says that RTI should be the last resort, that there should be a proactive culture of information release, that it should be the third tier of having to ask for information. You shouldn't have to ask for it. To turn around and have the government say in this place today that as far as they're concerned, if people want to know more than various matters as the purpose of a meeting between a government minister and potentially a vested interest stakeholder, they can RTI it, well, that is just offensive to its core, Mr President, and it's entirely against what's being recommended in that RTI report today. So I can't wait to see what the government's going to do in response to that report, because on the basis of what we've heard here today, they're going to do not much.
Yeah, I was about to stop you from saying something you wish you hadn't.
It's going to be an unparliamentary expression, but it's going to be not much, Mr President. Not much at all. Because if they're going away and telling people to go RTI these meetings rather than have them actually just put some basic information straightforwardly in the public domain, that is just absolutely reprehensible.
How would you know what to RTI anyway?
Exactly right.
Various matters.
But you just shouldn't have to. It's just ridiculous.
The whole notion.
To say there are various models around the country is true, but it's also a complete excuse. We are one of the worst. To claim that there is no model that's best practice is utterly rubbish. There's plenty of information available. We have expert academics who have provided numerous submissions through numerous inquiries and different sorts of examinations of this issue available on the public domain across various jurisdictions. Our very own Integrity Commission has made it patently clear what should be in a ministerial diary disclosure scheme. Patently clear. For the government to say there's no information available, that's the quote I have from the government's contribution, about what would constitute best practice, absolute rubbish. Clearly haven't read a thing from our state integrity entity, the Integrity Commission. Clearly haven't cared to read, perhaps, Mr President, a thing from our Integrity Commission on this topic. Absolutely ridiculous. Of course, we know exactly the features that would be included in a best practice model here for a ministerial diary disclosure scheme. We could absolutely adapt those features most relevantly to fit this jurisdiction, and that's exactly what a consultation process would provide us the opportunity to do, to tailor the principles of well-known best practice in this place to fit here. That's why I've called for consultation on it, so that nobody's dictating what the outcome should be. We should discuss what it should look like here, knowing clearly in the publicly available best practice approaches that are there readily available to any government that isn't covering its eyes and blocking its ears and saying la 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 la, Mr President. Because that's what this government's doing when it comes to genuine transparency, to genuine integrity, to genuine accountability. They're putting their fingers in their ears, they're closing their eyes and they're saying, la, 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 we're doing something, let me list the things. Oh my goodness me, Mr President. Steam is coming out of my ears. And in fact, to refer then to a whole range of matters relating to the RTI Uplift project. Clearly the speech was written for the Leader, and I appreciate the Leader's reading out a speech provided to her by the government, but clearly that speech was written maybe not even knowing the RTI report was going to come out today, because to point to that we're successfully doing things in that space is a complete, made a mockery of actually by the report coming out today. There's so much improvement that's required in that area, and while the RTI Uplift project has been a positive start on some matters, and the report says that too, there is so much more to be done to deliver the intent of a genuine RTI system based on the legislation we have, to actually begin to pat ourselves on the back about what we're currently doing. It's just effectively a bit of a look over here moment for the government today in relation to this motion. The report today identifies, that RTI report today identifies clearly directions for us to take. I can already read the writing on the wall, Mr President, that this government is going to be not the slightest bit interested in taking any of them based on its response to this motion and the sorts of things it's happy to pat itself on the back about in terms of our current RTI system. Talk about absolute joke. To talk about continuing to strengthen the government's transparency agenda. This is a government that has yet to demonstrate any genuine interest in a transparency agenda. If the government was remotely interested in a transparency agenda, it would be welcoming this motion. It would be acknowledging that it is a straightforward, very reasonable request, and it would want to deliver the outcome that's being intended from it. As the member for Hobart said, good governments have nothing to hide. Good ministers have nothing to hide. They would be welcoming this, they would be engaged with doing it. Instead of saying, we can't imagine what a best practice model might be, they would actually understand that the best practice model principles are there readily available, and they would be going to look for them, and they would be keen to put them in place and have Tasmania be the best jurisdiction in the country. We could get there quite easily from where we are now. We could get there if there was genuine intent, if there was genuine interest in a transparency agenda, rather than just performative faux transparency, which this government clearly intends to continue to deliver. Mr President, I think that was a disgraceful contribution from the government. We'd laugh if it wasn't so disgraceful, but we can't laugh about it. I hope members will recognise that it's actually appropriate for our chamber, on behalf of the Tasmanian community that we represent, to be always working for improvement when it comes to government accountability, when it comes to accountability around ministerial decision making, and when it comes to just basic architecture of good governance and integrity in this state. We're putting this in place for today, we're putting it in place for tomorrow, we're putting it in place for this government, but we're putting it in place for future governments too. So I invite members to support this motion for the third time, essentially. And I invite the government to have a good hard look at itself on this. If this is passed for a third time in this chamber, I invite the government to take it seriously and respect the call of this chamber, and to do work that is entirely in the benefit of the Tasmanian community, to the benefit of public interest, and ultimately to the benefit of the government, quite frankly, where it can actually point to where it's walking the talk rather than just integrity washing itself through faux measures. But before I bring my contribution to a close, Mr President, I've been asked to move to adjourn this debate for the purposes of a dinner break, and then we resume hereafter, I believe. So may...
You might get a second wind.
I might, you never look out. So may I move to adjourn the debate, Mr President?
The question is, the debate stand adjourned. Those of the honourable member for Murchison.
Just on the question of adjournment, I thought we were going to deal with this motion and then go to dinner rather than adjourn it now. I mean, I'm not sure why everyone's spoken that was going to. So I'm just clarifying whether or not it makes sense to adjourn the debate at this point, or rather deal with this motion and then adjourn for a dinner break.
I could withdraw it, I guess.
We have a couple of options. You can either keep it adjourned and we'll come back and you can start again, or you can withdraw and then the leader will move for. I'll put the question and then the leader will move that.
Oh, well, if the leader could, sorry. I thought I was thank you, Mr President. I thought I was being asked to do it because otherwise we'd move on to the next business and we wanted to have a break. I'm going to withdraw my adjournment. I'm going to finish my contribution and ask members to support the motion that's before the House.
Thank you very much. The question is the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it.